Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
If you're a fan of comic books and comic book conventions, Daytona Beach Comic Con needs to be on your list of must-attend events. It's a show that actually focuses on comic books. Imagine that! This year's event is happening on Saturday, September the 6th, and Sunday, September the 7th. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. There's a new convention in town, and it's sure to be mega fun without the mega expense. Comics, toys, collectibles, pop culture. ShadowCon, Saturday, February 1st, 2025 in Orlando, Florida. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. If you find yourself in the Orlando area, and let's be honest, doesn't everyone come to Orlando for the House of Mouse? Head over to Coliseum of Comics to get your comic book fix. Be sure to check out their location on East Colonial Drive, where they carry a wide selection of independent comics, including Silverline books. Stop by and don't forget to tell them Silverline sent you. Hey, if you're an independent comic creator looking to get your comic printed, look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our comics and do a fantastic job. They can even print special edition covers. When you reach out to them, be sure to tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, joined as always by Ron Fortier.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
And Jose Fuentes.
Hi.
And tonight we're going to be talking about illustrating Westerns in the comic space. So this is probably going to be a heavily Jose-fronted episode.
We're in trouble.
David's not with us quite yet, so we'll see how tonight goes. But yeah, Jose being our resident illustrator and inkist is kind of the art soul of the show. But also, Jose has some practical experience having written and worked on his own Western comic.
I did.
Yes. And there is Dave as well.
Hey, Dave.
Hey. And Dave, of course, is a colorist, which is the other half of the visual language of comics. So, Dave, do you have any experience coloring in Westerns or experience in sort of that either Western genre or that stereotypical Western palette, a lot of like the dusty browns and ales, you know?
Not really, not a lot.
Okay.
Most of the stuff. I did have a reference. It's not actually Western, but it is a horse thing that I found. I just wanted to show from one of my favorite books.
Oh yeah.
There is an interlude at the end of this series that has is a huge break, but there's a interlude story at the very end of it here, and
Yeah.
you have Kevin Matchstick fighting a demon horse, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And there's a shot of him actually on the horse. It's pretty cool.
That's dope.
So
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's pretty cool, and it kind of reminded me of some of the things that I like is if you think of some of the westerns, some things that I like are those, like demonized, possessed horses, and kind of think of like the original Ghost Rider with the horse, and I also thinking of things with like the gunslinger Spawn, and the horse in there and stuff. So I think there's a cool thing that you can do with them. That's an element. I know, you can also mix that with other genres like in the Lord of the Rings with the ring wraiths and stuff like that. So, I think you could really do some cool stuff with drawing like an undead horse, in Western times that maybe is the horse and the rider or a tormentor of a village and, stuff like that. So there's some pretty cool things that you can do with that. I think it's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. So, like I said, tonight's going to be mostly talking about illustrating Westerns as comics. So, last week we talked a lot about writing stuff. So, this week we're going to kind of open up the floor for the more visually minded to talk about things. We did not commit to making Jose and myself live draw horses.
I do have.
So I was going to. I had my phone set up and went out, but I think there's some miscommunication. It's not getting to work. But I did try. So we'll admit it.
So I'm curious, Jose. So what's this Western comic you did?
So it was a weird, like a Weird West kind of thing. I had this idea about. So there's this priest and his name was Chance, and there was this nun and her name was Seraphine, and the priest and his mentor and a group of nuns were on their way to a town called Penance to spread the good word. Along the way, they get attacked by bandits who killed the mentor priest and like strung Chance up on a tree. For the nuns, they basically were going to leave them alone except for Seraphine. One of them was trying to get a little handsy, and so she, like, in supplies from the wagon spilled out, and she was backing up away from the guy and kind of stepped on a pitchfork and popped it up, and the guy ran into it. And so the Mother Superior came around the corner and thought that she had killed her, and so she just kicked her out of like the order right there. So she's kind of lost. So the whole story follows Chance, who feels that he's not forgiven. I guess I don't know, but he is trying to save Seraphine's soul because she feels that God has abandoned her and going off doing all kinds of just like harmful things to herself. And so the premise of the story is him searching and looking for the leader of the bandits that did this, while trying to keep her from spiraling down to like despair and whatnot.
All right, so I mean, this is a one-issue thing or a miniseries or what?
So when I was young and I did this, my whole goal when out it was going to be a 12-issue miniseries or maxi series. I was like, oh, it's going to be great. I only ever made one book. Never really went any further with it. Just things got in the way, family got in the way. Well, not in the way, but you know what I mean. Family took
Well,
priority. So, you
it's
know,
on the back shelf, right? Who knows what can happen
yeah,
later on, right? Yeah,
right.
never give up. Sounds like a great idea and a great plot. Hey, someday, But I'm just kind of curious because the theme of tonight's show. What do you remember about drawing it as far as the concept of a Western? What was your biggest challenge?
So I will say, I created the book. I actually had a friend draw it for me. At
There
the
you go.
time, I was not confident in my art to even remotely like put pencil to paper for it. But he did. I found a guy. His name was Ash Jackson, and he's a really good guy. He did the artwork for it, like from pencils to colors, everything. And I did. The story that I created, I lettered it and whatnot. Got Stuart Sager, who did. He does a lot of like sketch covers now and whatnot, but he did the Bionicles comic book, and so got him to do a cover for us, and it was pretty cool. And that was really like handy because I was already a fan of his, and he at the time I was living in Indianapolis, and he was from Indianapolis, so like we really got to talking, and my best friend kind of like negotiated to get him to do a cover for us. So it was pretty cool.
All right.
That's
Very
awesome.
cool.
But yeah, with your
And had I thought about it, I'd have gone to find it. It's buried. I have like one or two copies left buried in my log box.
nice. My question then, kind of following up from that, is then had now being more confident in your illustration skills and having the series only been one issue when you originally launched it. Has there been any sort of lingering thoughts or desires to go back and take it back up and kind of do it on your own as a side project?
Oh, absolutely. Like not the idea. I mean, I'll be honest. It definitely brought it back. Seeing Hamlet's End, it definitely brought like the ideas like, oh, dude, that's pretty cool. You know what I mean? And if I did it again or continued on with it, I'd probably do the illustration myself. But like I said, horses.
Yeah. So that is something that like every genre kind of has its own like piece that makes it either challenging or unique or whatever. So like for war stories and all that, you have like the complex machinery that you want to get accurate. For capes, it's feet. When you're drawing a Western, what is it about a horse that makes it so difficult to get the anatomy right?
Okay, so you know that a horse has the exact same anatomy as a human, right? Like the exact same anatomy. The only difference is parts and aspects are extended a little further and everything, right? The only thing they don't have horses don't have clavicles, right? That's why their like legs can come out like are right here. You know what I mean? Their front legs, and it's figuring out the connection. So like the front legs don't necessarily bend like this, right? It's like they bend up like this and then around, and like it comes up and down instead of like ours. Our arms come down and forward. Theirs go forward and down. You know what I mean? In regards to like the front legs, and then but that's basically what the wrist. They do have let's see the bicep. They have the bicep real short, and then you have a long forearm, and then you have like what would basically be like the hand. It's weird.
No, I think that, but also speaking for someone who does do painting, part of it I think also has to do with when I worked in majors is how complex their like mains and coats are to render, because you'll get like a bunch of weird different like interjects of coloration in the parts you wouldn't expect, like coloring like the haunch to make it look just right to get the right depth.
Right.
Because and so
where to put the sheen.
Where to put the sheen, yeah. And I find that some of that maybe has translated into the rest of the visual language of Westerns, especially like if I remember, it's like the old like Clint Eastwood posters, like how much like almost oil painting style rendering there's done on that, where it's not like over rendered is not like a lot of depth, but you're throwing like 8 different colors on the transition, just like working up in the gradient on his face. And stuff we wouldn't necessarily expect to be in there, but it's just like these slow like build-ups to get the right thing. And so when you actually look at it, it looks very painterly, but sort of this whole like visual language of westerns, I feel like is very heavily like oil style rendered. I don't know if like I'm talking on my butt here, or if David, do you have any input on that? And the
Well, ironically, I've really only drawn one horse, and it was thing for a roommate that I had at the time, and she was one of the she worked at this ranch where people would board board their horses, and she would ride them, and she would compete with them and everything. And one day she brought me a Polaroid of one here, and she wanted a drawing done, and I actually went out and found that. It's not a full horse; it's just a portrait. But it's interesting because you're talking about some of the sheen and some of that. So let me share it with you, and you can maybe it's going through and similar to what you're talking about. So, all right, here goes.
We'll get some rest.
yeah,
We'll see you tomorrow.
So this is just a pencil drawing, but you can see like the subtleties that you're talking about, where just by the lights defining those lines on the side of the face and things like that. So this is just, like I said, this is just something that I threw together, and it's really the only horse I've ever drawn or anything. But it's kind of a just something out there, and I thought, okay, well, maybe you may want to do this, but see this, but it's kind of like you're talking about with the different layers and the subtle lack of lines here and pushing it forward and all that. So I don't know. I just that's the only thing that I've done particularly related to that. So
yeah. Well, that's kind of something like this is actually a really good example. It's kind of like if you're using this as like just like a light map, where like when you talk about rendering and stuff, like the old school traditional ways, like you do have like the 3-step rendering to have your mids, highs, and lows for each color. And like with a horse, it's weird because you have so many different colors so close to each other, and they're all going to have their own mid, high, and low, but also they're going to like appear in each other at different points and kind of blend. So you're going to gain this really weird transition or gradient across all of them, where you end up getting like someone else's high in this mid over here or this low over here, and they kind of blend together. Like if you see like the big meaty part of like a horse's back leg, you can see a lot of like, or a lot of things will kind of like blend together and mix together. And so I found that kind of that same way where things just kind of appear each other, where even like the rest of Westerns, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but even if we're doing like a backscape, right, like a background where you have like the mountains of like Nevada or whatever, it's the mountains in the background. And if someone's doing it very painterly or whatever, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening in that render that isn't necessarily what you would like initially think. Like you might find some blues in there or something in there, but it all adds together to create the visual context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you tend to, when I'm thinking a lot of the visuals and what I've seen in comics, you do see that that sharp gradient of like a lot of the lighter blues up on top, but because of the environment with a lot of the dirt and everything, you have a pretty quick transition into like lighter browns and tans and things like that, just in getting into like ground level, and right above ground level you have that kind of fade thing. So you're also not doing a lot of really sharp, vibrant colors. Everything's sort of washed out, things like that. So
absolutely. So I guess then you kind of talk about like though everything's washed out, but also I find that the texture of a Western, like if like a really well like like coherent Western visual. Like you can almost like taste the dirt off of it, right? You can taste the dust in the paint in the picture. So something that I know is probably like the transitioning from beginning in artistry to being more advanced is being able to do good texturing on top of what you've illustrated. So how do you go about when you're, you have these characters that are dusty, they're road worn, and kind of, you have a gunfight in a small town and dust is kicking up or it's a sandstorm, whatever. How do you add the dust and dirt to characters or settings in a way that doesn't overshadow anything and like obscure necessary detail, but also doesn't feel like it's sort of tacked on afterthought? That's probably be for both of you guys, since this is something that's touched on for like kind of every step of the illustration.
My thought would be in regards to like doing like pencil and ink wise, you know, obviously you want your shadows, you know what I mean, to accentuate. I mean, you can use shadows in like different like inking techniques, but um, I like using like in regards to like the background, like using a lot of thinner lines. But it's easy to show like dust kicking up because you get those like ground clouds, so to speak, right? And if you do those in like a thinner line, you know what I mean, that gives the impression it's not not something heavy, you know what I mean? Because that, yeah, dust being kicked up from like the back of a horse on a galloping and whatnot, right? You're gonna see like a little bit of a dust trail, but it's not like a heavy thing, right? So like if you thin your lines out, you know what I mean, you can like spatter in there a little bit, you know what I mean, just to give it some speckle and stuff like that. But to me that gives it more of like a wisp, I guess, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? As opposed to like the ground, you would have your thicker line for the ground as opposed to that dust being kicked up.
From a coloring standpoint, what I may do is take and do some color holds on those thin lines, so they're not quite black. You wouldn't want to do them like a vibrant, so you kind of want to kind of take them into like a brownish gray, and just bring them down a little bit, because exactly like Jose was talking about, it's not about over rendering and pushing it in your face, unless, like he mentioned, you're trying to define that a rider is running quick, he's going somewhere, you're really trying to push that speed, so then you would tend to accentuate the the dust kicking up and all that to indicate the speed. But if you're talking about somebody just kind of moseying into town type thing, then yeah, thinner lines work great. Washing them down so they're not the same color weight as the rest of the lines. Some things, depending on what type of look and feel that they want, may determine from a coloring aspect if I want to put like some kind of a texture hint in like clothing and things. So a lot of you got a lot of those kind of burlap clothing that they put on. So maybe you want to put some kind of just kind of subtle texture in there to indicate that this is a burlap thing rather than a standard clothing thing. But it all depends on the person. If kind of something similar to what you did with Wolf Hunter and all that, if you wanted to have more of that washed out, almost painted brush type, European spaghetti western type thing, then you would kind of go and you would play more than that. You wouldn't want to put any detail. You want more subtle hints and things like that. Maybe it's maybe you're not taking the entire area and making, just as an example, a background maybe you're not making a background with 100% similar blue color. Maybe you want to fade it out a little bit on the edges and kind of give it that kind of washed out. Maybe the artist and writer want something more in like possibly a little more in why am I completely breaking on how to pronounce it? A sepia type tone. So there's a lot of different factors, and just walking in and just hitting it, with your thing may not be what the other creators want. So having that that verbiage on what their design is and working with them, I think is a big thing. It will help dictate from a coloring aspect what you want to put in and how you want to go. And perfect example, I'm sure Ron's got a lot of good knowledge on that.
Well, I mean, what I'm listening to and we're talking about here is this whole concept of the American Western comic, to start with, basically got most of its concepts or inspirations from movies, from American Westerns, okay? And so watch the evolution of that from the 40s when it was highly romanticized, terribly. I mean, so that you made, these great heroes out of Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and all these guys, all right, who basically, rode around, fighting bad guys while at the same time sitting on their horse and playing guitar and singing to the senorita or whatever, all right? And so Hollywood was much more concerned at that time with pretty much doing, like I said, these flighty Westerns of the good guys, fighting the bad guys. There wasn't much consideration to authenticity as to clothing or whatever. And that got reflected in the comics of the times, because you were doing comics of your Western heroes that you saw on the screen. So you had things like Buck Jones comics and Tom Mix comics and Roy Rogers comics and all this good stuff. We start to get into the 50s after World War II, where there's this really authentic desire on a lot of young writers and directors coming to Hollywood to do authentic Westerns, okay? So now to start researching, all right, start looking at places like Deadwood, Tombstone, all right, and digging into this. And if you ever saw any of the actual black and white photographs taken of some of these towns, all right, they're black and white, but the austerity of the towns themselves, and you see the roads filled with mud, and it starts to dawn on you that, oh, wait a minute, these bright rainbow colors that Hollywood's been giving us for the last 10, 15 years, maybe aren't what was really going on, that maybe we had a palette that was a lot more earth tone, obviously, all right, and that these guys were dirty. It was almost impossible to stay clean in these environments of the frontier, whether you were on the trail, a cattle drive. If you were on a cattle drive, forget it. Jose talked about dust kicking up. Well, a couple thousand cattle and you're riding behind them, at the end of the day, you're going to be caked with dust, all right? I mean, you're going to be choking with this stuff. That's horrible, all right? So, again, we started seeing this shift where movies started getting to be a lot more authentic, to the point where the clothing, the weaponry, the wagons, all of this stuff with more adult storylines, and that now starts to translate into the comic field. And that's where that becomes really important, all right? That you start to understand the difference in that storytelling, and what you guys have just been talking about is that you need texture, you need dirt and grime, you need this feeling of, I mean, one of the things I always was grateful for the spaghetti Westerns, and the Europeans look at American Westerns, they basically said, well, you know what? As much as you guys, are authentic Americans and you grew up with this whole cowboy ideology and whatever, you still didn't play up the panorama of your backgrounds. And suddenly, like Sergio Leone and the others, you've got these wide vistas that they're playing against. All right, and I think most of these things were shot in Spain or whatever on the plains, but they opened up the Western, the whole concept. Again, this comes back to America, and we started doing things like Silverado and Tombstone and playing off of that.
Silverado.
Again, that huge stage, that huge background. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about is when drawing a comic, a Western comic now, okay, as opposed to a superhero or science fiction or whatever, how important is the background, okay, and your decision on panel compositions and exactly the number of panels on a page? Because when I'm writing Hamlet's Inn, I am using pretty much a 5-6 panel arrangement and sometimes even 4 panels, because I have all that history in my mind about that vista of the background, all right, this Western landscape that Zane needs to play off to tell the story as honestly as we can. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I like the setting, right? In regards to Westerns, right? I love the setting. I mean, there's a lot. Okay. So there isn't a lot, right? So you have plains, you have, some Badland, stuff. You can definitely go online or find some iconic like Western like scenery or things of that nature if you want to use as a reference. But most of the time you're just taking a couple aspects here and there, and um as long as you like set the tone even for each individual page, you don't necessarily have to draw a ton. But when it comes to buildings in like small towns and stuff like that, I think I mentioned this last week. I love the idea of drawing small towns. You know what I mean? Especially like small Western towns. The buildings were crude. You know what I mean? Yeah, they had stuff with balconies. They did a few things here and there to try and make it as modern as a Western town can be. And so most of that, like if you look at like old photos and like even like creative liberties taken with like the game Red Dead Redemption, you see a lot of like flair in regards to like the architecture for like those buildings, right? Um you get, like the molding that's on there, I think some Western like second stories, like if you ever watch like you said, Silverado, uh I just drew like Tombstone and whatnot. There's a whole lot of wainscoting in like the upstairs, like which is just things that I would have never known what that was to begin with. But like seeing that, and like then I've actually watched like several was it farmhouse reconstruction shows and whatnot, which I think are really cool. But you see a lot of textures, you know what I mean, in regards to like the architecture in the building, which is fun to draw. But you said um in regards to like how you use 5-6 panels. I think 5-6 panels are fine. You know what I mean? It gives you plenty of room as an artist to set the tone, set the setting. You know what I mean? If there's a chase across, you know what I mean, uh, planes and whatnot. You have plenty of settings to, add a little touches here and there, add a little Easter eggs, you know what I mean, that, as an artist, I like to add Easter eggs. I just did a cover for Kalis, and I haven't told the boss yet, but I put Tom Cruise in there. So, little things like that, having people in, drawing people in like the saloon and whatnot, like throwing a little couple things here and there. You wouldn't, most people might not notice, but if you're a Western fan, I might throw the Duke in there somewhere. You know what I mean? I might add a little couple things here and there, just to, for sure. Oh, dude, like I saw that. That's cool. I was like, I'm glad you noticed it, right? But I like drawing that setting. I really do. It's simple. One of the first, I tried to draw a car chase scene in art school, and I did, like it was a 57 Chevy and a Riviera racing down the street. Of course, I had to take classic cars, right? But I did it on like the backdrop of like a desert highway, and so I got to draw like the plateaus that are there, and like a bunch of cactus and like shadows across here and there. So like drawing that particular setting is actually pretty fun. Like if it's an interest to you, if you're like, oh, I don't like westerns, it might not be the thing for you to draw, but at least give it a try. Check it out. Look at references and see how cool it would be. So I'm not sure if that answers your question on my end. But.
Well, I'm kind of I'm if I'm thinking about the things like layouts and all that stuff. One of the things that I would kind of concentrate on is depending on what the theme of the range of panels and pages you're working on. So if you're just either concentrating on the main characters or whatever, then all of your detail and everything would be on those characters, on a horse rider coming in or dealing with two horse riders against each other, back and forth. But I would be downplaying a lot of the background, simplified a lot of the background. But in cases where where a guy gets maybe he gets jumped and tied to the back of his horse and sent through, those type of pages is where you would kind of flip, or I would think about flipping, because in those kind of instances you can really play on the harsh environment, really hot sunny days, and things that you can play into that type of maybe some a little bit of distortion, so things aren't quite as clear, just to kind of things to drive that point across. As far as number of panels, I think that's that's a tough one, and it all depends on where you are with the story. Maybe it is in this particular place 3 panels might be good, and maybe in this place, depending on what you're trying to do, is you may want to even like if you're trying to describe a scene with a bunch of people, then maybe 8 panels or 7 panels of different people and different surrounding characters to kind of set your theme are good. So it all depends on where you're at with that. Also, one of the things that you talked about, kind of separate, kind of going back, was you were 100% right on the Roy Rogers and all that. It was the Hollywoodized. Nobody was that clean, that sharp, that
exactly.
And I recently a couple of TV series that come to mind that I think portray a lot of things from that time frame is Hell on Wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, sure, definitely.
And Deadwood.
Yeah,
definitely. Oh, wow, great stories.
So I think they do bring that whole kind of the dirty, just the dirt, and people walking through muds trying to hold, the girls trying to hold their dress up so that they minimize the amount of mud that they get all over their dress and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of that. And then one of the things I'm also thinking about is depending on how you're structuring a book, a couple of things come to mind is if you're trying to get kind of that whimsical or feeling for a lot of the traveling showmans type thing, then maybe there might be some type of like their pamphlets, the way their pamphlets were laid out, kind of a little bit extravagant. The pages are a little more extravagant to show this sensationalism. And another thing that was coming to mind was a lot of these towns that were at the time were driven by particular things. So it was a mining town. You were looking at a lot of focus around mining and stuff like that, and bringing in the things like, you know, the saloons. You kind of weigh, saloons were a big thing with money. You know, they want these minors to come in and spend their money, you know, in the saloons. So on a design aspect, then you may want to, you know, kind of look at, you know, it's a big selling point. So maybe, you know, the saloons and stuff may have a lot of flashy things for the time. So, you know, there may be, you know, a lot of, you know, fancy, you know, for the time, fancy furniture. You know,
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, yeah,
stuff like that.
adornments and furniture, definitely. I mean, I was talking about that earth palette, but you go into the saloon, and if you're going to have maybe, you know, saloon girls, all right, then just the opposite. That counter, as far as coloring is concerned, is they're going to be in gaudy, bright colors.
Right.
All right, and that's where you're going to get your rich blues and maybe reds, purples, who knows what, right? And part of this whole discussion talking about this stuff, how important the settings are. I always got a kick out of Silverado in that concept where Kevin Kline talks about how he likes a good saloon. All right, and if you look at some really decent, Western comics, there's so much in a saloon that if you do your research and you make an authentic saloon, there is a lot of material there to set your characters and your stories against. Now, one of the things that I wonder sometimes, if graphic artists give consideration of thought, is that if you were in a typical Western town post-Civil War, all right, which was an established town where you had businesses, a little Main Street, right? You had a stable with, what are called blacksmith doing, work for the horses and whatever. You might have a church at the end of the street, blah, blah, blah. You had the beginnings of what we call sidewalks, which are boardwalks. So people didn't have to walk into the dirt and get muddy. And that was the impetus and origin of why we have sidewalks, all this good stuff, right? So I wonder if people, or, again, writers writing Westerns or drawing them, give a thought to the fact that when the sun set, what was your lighting like? That's why most businesses, not saloons, but most businesses, once that sun set, you locked up the door because you didn't have electric lights. You didn't have a business at night. When night came, most of the people running, the local mercantile store or the feed store or the dress shop closed up shop. The saloon, on the other hand, had oil lamps situated all over the place. And if you're drawing those scenes, we were talking earlier, and Tim was talking about texture, okay? Well, if you're in a saloon at 9 o'clock at night and you're lit by oil lamps and half of your patronage is smoking cigars or cigarettes or whatever, there better be some kind of cloud of dust hanging in that room. Of smoke. There has to be, all right? Mm-hmm. And nobody does it. Everybody just out the window doesn't think of how that light's diffused and how it's not really good for your eyes after a while. You would eventually go blind if you spent too much time in there. The flip side of this is you're out on the prairie, all right, and you build a campfire. Well, what's that do to lighting a scene and building the drama around it, all right, and sitting around a campfire? How does it reflect? And what are the shadows and the night light, and, et cetera? There is so much potential of background settings in a Western if people would just study and do it honestly. Right. You could create some amazing comics.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I was kind of going with is, you think about a town and, you walk into the town, the first thing they want to sell you is the saloon,
Yep.
That's where they want you to spend your money. So you look, as Jose was talking about, you're looking down the street and it's like, okay, well, here's the saloon. That's the most beautiful thing. And then right next to it is a general store. That's about as basic as you can be.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of that, that layout and things you can do to go through and, establish, your area.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, if you actually rode into a town after dark, the only place lit up and still doing business was the saloon. So you didn't have to go too far to look for it, because 10 to 1 you could hear the tin piano playing down the street, and the only building lit up, that's the saloon. That's where I'm heading. There we go.
Yeah. And something we didn't really talk about in the writing episode, but kind of worth mentioning as well as a tack on, is the importance of like what are known as third places in storytelling writing. The third place being a place where society or the kind of the social part of town or neighborhood or wherever you live in can meet together in a place that is necessarily like defined by business. And for a lot of the American West, that was the saloon. So if you wanted to have characters meet each other, I mean, that's why so many like stories and dating campaigns start with you meet in the tavern. It's kind of the same idea if you have that third place where the social hub happens. Yeah. And so it makes sense to also have a unique visual identity. And so we kind of talked about like the backgrounds and the towns and the buildings are in their identity, but of course, every good Western has a character as well with a strong sort of visual marker or identity, which helps in a time period where everyone was dirty, wearing riding leathers, and probably carrying weapons of similar make or model. So in reality, there probably wasn't a whole lot of visual distinction between one outlaw and another, besides their own calling cards. However, when you look at the media and the storytelling and what makes characters stand out to us, so you get things like the outlaw Josie Wells, Rooster Cogburn, even real life characters who got fictionalized like Pancho Villa and his signature bandoleros. But you have these kind of unique visual markers that make these characters really seem and stand out as larger than life heroes or villains in their stories. So as writers, we have our own thoughts on how we're going to assign these things and make them stand out. Common's character in Hell on Wheels with his bowler cap. But as artists, colorists, when you're either given a character description and it may or may not include one of these visual calling cards, if there isn't one, how do you go about creating the visual identity of these characters in these comics to make them stand out more? Or if there is sort of this unique visual identifier, how much time and care do you spend on that piece of the outfit versus the rest of it, which is the blue jeans and the riding leathers?
White hats and black hats, Tim. That's how you designate.
There you go.
Either that or they're the cowboys and have the red sashes, right?
Yes.
See, white hats are the good guys, black hats are the bad guys, and you have the big hat that's all smushed in. You're a minor.
Mm-hmm.
If old school westerns have taught me anything, they've taught me that.
Right.
But yeah, like Dave was saying, in regards to the Cowboys from Tombstone and whatnot, they were based off real people, so they definitely had a designation, like gang colors basically, So that's a nice clarification. You know what I mean? I'm glad that it's something that but you do it with any even with tapes and teams and tapes comics and whatnot. You have designated colors. The X-Men's were blue and yellow. You know what I mean? And mine just is comics, but was it the bad guys didn't necessarily have colors, but yeah, the good guys had colors. The bad guys had he had the black hat. They always had the pencil mustache in westerns and whatnot. They were Dick Dastardly. You know what I mean? That's not necessarily a western, but
I mean, but it would give you the idea of the meme or the stereotype of the mustache twirling bad guy comes from westerns, right? It's the
yeah.
And kind of to Dave's point there, pulling back to Josie Walls, the idea of the cowboy, the hero wearing the red sash, right, is you have the character who is supposed to be this outlaw, who is as described as a bad guy, but he's the guy wearing the big red scarf, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of pulling on cultural zeitgeist to help identify who the audience is actually going to be sympathetic towards.
But like even that, like I said, even the different markers that mark the good guys from the bad guys, like they're used. People use them now, and it's all based on Western styles and Western, like Hollywood's version of Westerns. Like, was it like you said, like the Roy Rogers shows and whatnot? Like, is that good guys always had white or something bright, and bad guys always had something black. You know what I mean? Black shirt, black everything. Like even the Lone Ranger was all stark white. Like, you know what I mean? Was he had a blue shirt? He had like a powder blue shirt on it.
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah,
Black.
You know, as a kid in the 50s watching that, you're going, yeah, of course, that's right. But then you get old and you go, what the heck? That doesn't make any sense. No freaking way.
Just Target.
I mean, was there a laundromat in town when they clean this stuff every week or something, you know? But yeah.
That's what he had Tonto for.
Well, you know, it's fascinating because things like if you're doing a series and you know, we're talking comics, but I get a kick out of this conversation because we're talking about saloons and towns, and arguably I think perhaps the most famous saloon ever devised was for one of the longest running Western television shows ever put. I mean, this thing came off a radio for years and then came to television. That was Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
In the Long Branch Saloon. And I would dare you to find one episode in the, 8-10 years that show was on TV that you didn't go into the Long Branch at least 3 or 4 times an episode. Mm-hmm. It's where everybody met at whatever the storyline was either people in town or strangers coming into town, or whether it was about Matt or Chester or Miss Kitty. But the anchor for the show was the Long Branch.
Yep.
And everything revolved around that. It was that central place where, as a writer, you could go back and forth and you know, set your narrative, put your characters like on stage, and there you go. This week's episode.
Yeah, and even if you're doing, like, I think especially if you're doing a traveling comic as well, a traveling story, saloons will allow you, both as the writer and the artist, to kind of like try a bunch of different styles. I think of, speaking of unique visuals for characters, but Firefly being a Western science fiction television show. Kind of 2 points to that is, like, one, you have Mel, of course, with his trademark brown lawn coat that he had from his army days, and it's kind of like the visual marker of Mel. But also, every time they went from planet to planet or station to station, like every episode always featured them going to some sort of drinking hole or something like that.
Yep.
And there's always some sort of visually different, but it allowed them to interact with the world around them, but also allowed the visual storytelling to talk about how each place was different from the last place they're just at, because the drinking hole or saloon to be different in certain ways.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that was always the case was the saloon was always the hub of information.
Mm-hmm.
It's where deals got made. It's where, you know, people met, and, you know, and they wanted information. That's the first place that they went. So that was always the hub. It kind of, you know, trafficked in, you know, alcohol and women and all this, but it also was a huge thing for back deals and information and things going on.
Definitely. Right.
So that's why you first, as soon as somebody comes into town, almost always first place they go is a saloon.
Yeah. That's also where you have that's also where you have like things like if they're going to do a job board, it'd be there, or if they had legitimate deals, like even like if they had a town postmaster would go to these kind of places because he knew that if there was a transporter or bounty hunter or whatever of repute or of skill, when the first thing they came to town, they're going to go to the saloon, kick their boots up, and grab something to eat. They're not going to bother coming into the postmaster to see what tasks have been, you know, need to be doing by the local town like government.
Yep.
Absolutely. And Frank Rubin or Reben in chat says that the whiskey was cheap. That's also like part of it is you got to think about the economics of your town, right? Or have the setting where if it is like a Western thing, people are probably living, unless there are like one of the more well-off bankers or like railroad tycoons, in which case that's when you get like those really fun parlor scenes where you're in a dusty town and then you walk into someone's parlor and like, oh, this is all imported goods. Why are you? What is this place? But well, a lot of people are living hand to mouth, so they're a lot of it is also just point of convenience. They're going from town to town picking up work to make sure they can eat when they get to the next town.
Well, also think about what Ron said is, you have this town, and for all effective purposes, during the day, people are working. The miners are mining, the blacksmiths are, everything. The general store people are in their store selling their wares. And what's the place, the one place after hours that people can, meet and do their business, sell their stock that they mine for the day and stuff like that, broker deals and things
Dave
like
and
that.
Buster's.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that helps that that's the one place it's open.
Well, I mean, right, and there's so many tropes inherent in a saloon to the point of even what's your drink, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because the cowboys come in from from the ranch or whatever, a hard day, punching cattle or whatever, and they're gonna have a beer or a whiskey or whatever vodka's on sale, okay? But then every now and then you get the traveling salesman or the tenderfoot, right? And he'll have a sarsaparilla. And I've watched enough of these shows where even the seasoned marshal will come in late at night before he starts his round, and he'll have a cup of black coffee. So it's like the minute they order a drink, you already know half of the background, who these characters are and what they're all about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Shortcut, literary shortcut.
Yeah. I think it was it Golgotha? I think where the Weird West storyline where the town marshal was the hanged man, right? And so his go-to drink was always the dead man's ale. Whiskey, ale with a shot of whiskey in it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. Subtle backdrop if I've ever heard.
Exactly. It's a little on the nose there, Sheriff.
Right.
But lost my train of thought there.
Subtle backdrop.
Subtle backdrop, yeah. Oh, kind of similar. I didn't mention also to keep it on the theme of visual differences. How like the real world example is you'd have these railroad tycoons or bankers who come and they'd of course would like essentially have things shipped from their offices that you'd have all of a sudden like these Persian silks and chaise lounge brought into the offices they'd set up in frontier towns. So when you have the sheriff or the outlaw go to do business with them and they walk in and all of a sudden it's like they walked into a different zip code.
Right.
A really fun extreme example of this is from the show Resistance, which is another sci-fi western, where the town is more or less governed by aliens who had a failed alien invasion of Earth. Essentially, all that they succeeded in was causing the apocalypse, and then their fleet got destroyed. So it was just the world was sent back to the Wild West, but the aliens still had their own stuff. And so when the lawmen would go into the governor's house, it was all this like strange bright whites and like weird crystal fluting and like this very absurd thing. And then you'd go back to the brothel that he lived at, and it's stereotypical brothel, and you just have this very strong contrast to show what kind of characters you're dealing with.
Isn't it always ironic that the saloon owner is either the bad guy or the borderline bad guy?
Well, so this
the power.
Power. And this also comes down to economics of it. Is that if you're the saloon person, you're probably going to, even if you are like a good guy, you're going to have to deal with some moral grayness, because if you kick out all the outlaws or bandits, then you lost half your customer base.
Right.
So kind of the best thing you can do with it is just like a hands-off no information approach. Is that you need information, you pay for it.
And that isn't fiction. That's pretty much authentic.
Yeah.
If you ever read, again, like the lives of some of these, characters, some of these lawmen, and their careers in different towns, and I want to say maybe 7 out of 10 of the more shady people controlling, the undercurrent in the town were the saloon owners, definitely. All right, because again, it's just the world they inhibited and took a position of leadership in their own way. So
yeah.
Plus, you also have the nice guys basically getting thrown out. New management who wants it more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's also interesting. Where like in the Golgotha series, one of the side plots is this turf war between the two saloon owners, because half the town are Chinese miners. So you have the Chinese quarter that has their own bar setup, which is managed by the Chinese gang, as well as the Chinese mystics that moved in there because it's a weird Western, so magic's real. And then the like Christian side of town has their own saloon that also services the Assassins Guild and a few other things. And so they constantly need to, they're dealing with a cult, so they constantly need to pull information or like communicate with each other, but also they don't want to because they're stealing each other's customer base or doing illicit deals on each other's turf. So you have this turf war that's going on while they're trying to deal with this bigger threat.
Those silly turf wars.
Mixture of good
That's a pretty
storytelling.
common thing in Western too. Was it not turf wars? Was it land wars? That was an actual thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, as back in the day, where deeding was very loosey goosey. So like, your deed was as good as you could pay the the postmaster to say your deed was good for. And so you constantly have things where you'd be fighting over like, well, actually, I own this acre over here. Well, no, you don't. My family had it since back then. It's like, well, I had the documents changed a month ago. It says I own it now. Then you have boys taking crack shots from the porches.
Or they would have an accident.
Yeah.
And then things were up for grabs, and somebody in power was usually the one auctioning it off and determining where it would go.
Just sell it to the railroad, those darn railroad people.
Well, I tell you, one thing I wish we had more Western comics out there today. I wish more of today's writers and artists would consider the genre and give it a shot. I mean, just from my past, the last 2 weeks, we've had these discussions, and it's just brought back so many really fun memories of when I was, a kid in the 50s and 60s. And I mean, most of the, the really great artists of the times, Joe Kubert, Gil Kane, Russ Heat, I mean, Dick Ayers. I mean, these guys drew Westerns, in their sleep. And they were some of the best Western comics ever produced.
Well, it's got some. Like I got this one here. I haven't read it yet, but it looks interesting.
Ooh, all right, nice.
It's a 4-issue series, and the first 3 are out.
Yeah. I guess also before we end, I should say that we already talked before about genre bending, but in all of our shows, you talk about the way that we've done things, or the way that things have been taught to us, or we're like, generally, what is this like the most like objective, good way to go about doing things? But also, at any point, if you do it well, you can't take any rule or anything we say and just throw it out the window.
Right.
Because at the end of it, it is art, and if you can make it work, that's the important part. And so, like I have a Western pitch that's floating around in the ether called "The Gunslinger's Guide to the Afterlife." And because it takes place mostly after some guy has already died, even though it's a Western, the idea for a lot of the lighting is probably going to be lots of blues and greens and sort of like these more like etheric colors, because it's the afterlife. It's not going to look like here. It's this guy going around killing ghosts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, personally, I want to get Hamlet's End out there.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
my thing. And then we'll see what happens after
Yeah.
that.
Well, let's run this trailer for Hamlet's End one more time, and then we'll sign off for the night.
Well, hold on. Tim,
What?
I held up to my end.
Oh, yes.
Ooh,
There it is.
Nice. Way to go, Jose.
There you go. Yeah.
Really nice.
Horse's head is a little long, but not too shabby.
No, that looks good.
Oh, nice piece. Excellent.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Tim's been working on his the whole time. I'm telling you.
The
Exactly.
whole time.
The whole time.
I'm not gonna lie. I was telling my friends about it, and I was like, "Oh, I'm dreading it." Like I told Tim, committed me to drawing a horse on stream, and like I said, I had my phone set up, but technical difficulties beat me. So
All right. Well, let's run this trailer.
Docking complete.
The Western genre is ripe for a comeback, with dynamic characters, intense action, and the rich American landscape. It's a storyteller's dream. That's why we've created our own Western adventure, gritty, raw, and ready for you. I'm Ron Fortier, the writer of Hamlet's End. In my 50-year career, I've written everything from Popeye, Peter Pan, The Green Hornet, Rambo, Terminator, and Gene Roddenberry's Lost Universe, among many of my own creations. This is my first Western. Our story is set in Arkansas, 1870, where a young woman named Dallas Maddox embarks on a journey of vengeance after her family is brutally murdered. Although a natural-born hunter, this time her prey is the two-legged variety. We wanted to capture the tension of survival in a lawless time, and Dallas is a character who embodies both strength and vulnerability. This is more than just another Western. This is a story of revenge, of survival, of one determined young woman facing impossible odds. It's not just about shootouts and chases. This is about justice and how far one person will go to get it. We've a gripping story with a remarkable heroine and jaw-dropping artwork. Now we need your help to bring this vision to life. Vengeance rides on the horizon. Dallas Maddox is ruthless and deadly, leaving legends and bodies in her wake as she grows into the most feared bounty hunter the West has ever known. Don't miss the ride. Don't miss Hamlet's End, Issue 1.
All righty, and we've got till March 7th to wrap up this Kickstarter. So, what do you got, Tim?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here.
I love it. Yes.
There's my horse.
Looks like Mr. Fred. There you go.
It looks like BoJack Horseman.
That's kind of what I was going for. Yeah, it's a little. Do a little quick cartoon.
That's awesome.
Oh, all right.
I need to try harder, Tim. I need to try harder. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think you definitely got better detail on there, though. So, all There you go. Thank you, Huey. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, March 7th. So go ahead and get your backing place for Hamlet's End. I'm super stoked for it myself.
Man. Yeah, you're good. I was agreeing.
Yeah. We'll be back next week with more Western talk. That is going to be on. Again, it's a tab I should probably have open, but for whatever reason I got rid of it. Next week is on writing revenge stories. So telling revenge stories through Westerns. Yeah.
There you go. All right. Sounds good.
We'll be back next week. So make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern on those respective days. We will be back next week talking about revenge. And you still have a couple weeks more to get your order in for Hamlet's End. So go ahead and do that. But we'll see you all next week. But until that time.
Until that time.
You say,
right?
Make mine
Silverline. Where's my camera? There it
is. Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.